Welcome to Elmhurst, our community. I'm Ken Bartels, your host, and we're coming to you from the business zone of the Community Bank of Elmhurst. Today's EOC program is focused on the making and the magic of West Suburban Living magazine. And to have that conversation, we have the editor and publisher of West Suburban Living magazine, Chuck Cozette. And Chuck, welcome to EOC. Very much look forward to the conversation. I've been a big fan of the magazine since it began. So for our audience, when did it begin, and have you been involved with it the entire time?
Yes, thanks, Ken, for the opportunity, first of all. We appreciate it. And especially since our roots are in Elmhurst. We started about 24 years ago. We were in a very small office above 1 South, the restaurant downtown, or I think that's what it's called, I'm sorry.
100 South.
100
yes.
South, thank you.
Yes.
And so we were there for, 5-7 years, and then we were up on North Church Street for a while. So for about the first 15 years of our existence, we were based in Elmhurst. And I lived here for about 2 years right out of college, so I have some connections, and my wife and her family has lived here. So there's definitely an Elmhurst connection to West Suburban Living. And it's one of the many towns that we cover. We cover about 50 communities, a little bit more than that, primarily in DuPage, but also in West Cook, and then also in the eastern edge of Kane County, the Fox Valley area.
So your professional background, education, was this something that you aspired to do or trained to do, or is it something that sort of happened?
A little bit of both. I definitely have a journalism background. I went to the University of Missouri and their journalism school, which was very good training for me. Worked for a weekly newspaper for a while, worked for a trade magazine, did a little public relations, did a little marketing for a couple of computer firms. But my dad had always encouraged me. He had a small business and encouraged me if I ever had a chance and an idea to consider pursuing it. He thought that was a good way. He enjoyed running his own show, so to speak. And I liked the idea, especially for the flexibility for time, so that I could coach my kids' teams and leave when I needed to and come back. And if I had to work late, that was okay. That flexibility was probably the biggest attraction. We looked at the western suburbs, and pretty much Chicago Magazine at the time stopped at 294. You just didn't read much about anything going on in the western suburbs prior to that. There was a North Shore magazine at the time that covered the northern suburbs, and I just looked at it and I said I thought there was an opportunity there. There had been a prior DuPage magazine that had lasted several years, but had not survived. So I did have that in the back of my mind. And it's one of the reasons we named it West Suburban Living, because we didn't want to limit ourselves just to DuPage. So the background was there, and journalistically, felt like there might be an opportunity there. Regional magazines were growing, and we saw the western suburbs really expanding in many ways, both entertainment-wise, restaurant offerings. So we just looked at it, and it's a combination of opportunity and hopefully training that we felt like it was the opportunity to give it a shot.
So what size staff does it take to put out a West Suburban Living magazine?
Well, surprisingly small. I liken it to being at a restaurant. People see our glossy, fancy publication, and so I liken it to a restaurant where you go to a nice restaurant, and outside everything's calm and collected and elegant, but then you go in the kitchen and you see craziness going on. And we're a little bit the same way. We have several people on staff, but it's primarily the managing editor and I who create the magazine each month. We come out 10 times a year, so we're not quite monthly. We have combined issues in July, August, and November, December. But so we work with a number of freelance
I was going to
writers.
say freelancers.
We've had a freelance designer at times. We've had a full-time designer. It really is just kind of an ebb and flow staff-wise on who's available and where we want to put our emphasis staffing-wise. Yes, it's a multiple people are involved, but ultimately I still am very hands-on. which I kind of like most of the time because I got into it because I wanted to be the editor and have a say, but I've been doing it for 23 years, and so every once in a while it gets a little old too, and I wish I was maybe in more of an emeritus position by now, and I could just guide things and let everything else happen by someone else doing it. But we've survived 23 years, and that's a great thing, and I'm very proud of that.
So, Mr. Editor, a couple of opinion questions.
Okay.
The first one would be in your coverage of, as you said, 50 communities, primarily in the western suburbs. How would you describe the interaction between those communities? Is it coexistence? Is it collaborative? Is it a certain amount of competition? How would you characterize that?
I think it's mostly coexistence. We don't hear much we work with a lot of different towns. So that's one of our challenges is because, we work with, one community on one project and another. We do a town focus, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure, but where we're featuring a town, and so we're very involved with that town for that issue, and then move on and maybe don't get back to them for a while. But it's coexistence and collaboration. I think that there's a mentality among all the western suburbs of, as the economy and as the western suburbs thrive, all boats rise a little bit. And so there might be a little competition for certain businesses and restaurants to locate, but that's a little more behind the scenes that we probably don't see. We see it more as collaborative or, kind of mutual admiration. I think, a town like Glen Ellen looks at Wheaton and says, hey, they're doing a good job, and vice versa. Elmhurst looks at, Hinsdale and says, hey, they're doing a great job with their downtown. And so I think they do take ideas from each other. I think it's been, we've seen a pretty thriving western suburbs considering all the change that's happened in the 23 years or 24 years almost now that we've been publishing.
I've been in this area my entire life, and I have I've got an observation that relates to my next question, and that is, it seems to me that the northern suburbs of Chicago and the southern suburbs of Chicago have a much more symbiotic relationship with the city. It seems to flow back and forth. It's almost seamless as you roll out of Chicago into the suburbs, both north and south. But there seems to be kind of an independence, that's the word I'll use anyway, to the western suburbs and their relationship with the city. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think I can see where you're coming from, and I sense that, but it does depend a little bit on the communities. We go all the way to Oak Park, and Oak Park has definitely more of a symbiosis with, and I think Riverside might be another good example, with the city, maybe even LaGrange to some degree. As you move further west, certainly, just distance alone
Sure.
has some kind of barrier. But I do think there is an independent streak, and I think that's really probably become stronger as the western suburbs have developed their own identity. I think, it used to be considered the western suburbs were more, suburbia, just bland, what one town's pretty much the same as the next town. And that's clearly not the case. It probably wasn't the case at the time. It was just a perception. But I don't even think the perception is there now. Because I do think many of the towns have really created pretty distinctive identities. They've done some pretty significant things. And then just the growth. I mean, Elmhurst obviously has grown, but you look at towns like Naperville, which are further out and had
Right.
more room for growth,
Exactly.
is virtually a city. And its downtown area represents that. So it's been a dynamic time to be covering the western suburbs. And I do think that it now has a sense of identity apart from Chicago. Although certainly the proximity and the availability to go into the city for certain things is still there, but there's a less a need for that. Many of the things that you used to go into the city for, great restaurants. I use the example of, you got Michael Jordan's, you got Mike Diska's, you got Harry Carey's. I only use those because they're well known
Right.
that you had to go into the city for now, and they're all now out here. And many restaurants launch here now before they go into the city. So I think that's just a good indicator of how significantly the identity has strengthened and changed over the years we've been involved.
So 23 years ago, did you envision West Suburban living to look like it does today? How has it changed over that period of time?
Well, it's definitely evolved. You know, there's been kind of, just like any business, I suppose, but certainly with all the technological change, the magazine industry has been affected by that. So there is an ebb and flow as far as what we've been able to do. Where we started out, and it was very challenging to get your name out there and build an identity, and we pretty well did that. And then there's a recession in 2008, and that hurt us as much as most, well, maybe not quite as much, but certainly had an effect on some of our advertisers. And then, of course, the digital age. So there's a lot more options for advertising dollars. And so we've kind of rode the tide. So, you know, when I started this, who knew about the digital world that we had?
Sure.
You know, I think it was just very primitive. So we really felt like we would have maybe a stronger identity now than we, after 23 years, than we do. Part of that is trying to cover some 50 communities. So the good thing is that there's a lot going on in 50 communities, there's a lot to talk about, but not every community looks at us and says, oh, that's our magazine, you know. We're not Wheaton Magazine, we're not Elmhurst Magazine, we're West Suburban Living. So I would have hoped that we would have had a little stronger identity, maybe a few more subscribers. We do have a strong subscriber base, I'm not complaining, but certainly that would be an area we want to reach more people. And so that's probably been the biggest surprise. But again, we're here 23 years later, 24 years later, and so we've kind of managed to adjust to the change, I suppose.
So who does decide what the focus of the magazine is month to month? I mean, I'm sure it's collaborative. At the same time, you have strong ideas. You mentioned a managing editor. Mm-hmm. You sit down and close the door and come out with a plan for the year or the quarter?
We do, actually. We put together an editorial calendar every year for the coming year. We usually do it in the fall, try to have it pretty much finalized by September, October. We do take input from readers. We do surveys. We do what I call our Best of the West every year, where we ask our readers their favorite things in more than 50 categories. It's one of our readers' favorite issues. But from that, we also learn. So we ask them where their favorite. So we just did, for example, in this current July-August issue, favorite place to picnic. And so that might be a question we might ask in the Best of the West, and so they will tell us some of their favorite places, and we'll take that information and use that as a basis of an article.
Right.
Many times, you know, we look at other regional magazines in other parts of the country. At various times, we belong to the City and Regional Magazine Association with other publications like Orange County Magazine and Chicago Magazine, and so there's a sharing of ideas there. We have a staff of freelance writers that we work with for a number of years, and we ask them for their ideas. Most of them live in the western suburbs and have for many, many years, so they are knowledgeable about trends and things that are going on. So we kind of try to cast the net wide to readers and to staff and to, you know, other people that, you know, I come into contact with, including advertisers. And from that, we kind of, you know, filter it down to something that's workable and you know, we think that will engage our readers and also inform our readers. I think that's one of our biggest challenges. We want to be what to do and where to go in the western suburbs. I mean, if we had to kind of scale it down to, you know, one sentence, was where to go and what to do. We also want to tell them about interesting people, you know, things like that. But you know, we kind of look at the whole article framework within that context of creating engagement with our readers and something. And so having lived here my whole life, I have a pretty good background in that too, of what I think will be of interest to our readers.
And each issue, as you mentioned earlier, and people familiar with the magazine, each issue focuses on one of the communities that you cover. Now, I'm pretty confident you don't go 1 to 50 in a circle rotation, but how does that get determined? Number of subscribers has to be in there somewhere, I suspect, but...
Well, we really look at it, we did start out trying to, and did to a large degree, be very equal for every community and try to feature every community when we first started out. However, there are some communities that just don't have a downtown area, that don't have as much attractions, and so we still try. So, for example, a town like Wayne, a very quaint but very small town, no downtown. But we featured Wayne in a town focus a couple times over our 20-some years. But we look at the bigger communities because, again, where to go and what to do. So if you're visiting Wayne, there's not much to do for an outsider. We initially set up our town focuses for readers from other communities, so that if you're passing through Elmhurst, you're visiting a friend in Elmhurst, you don't really know where to go and what to do, here's kind of our guide. What we found is that people love to read about their communities. If nothing else, they want to see what we got wrong or what we didn't know. So we actually do extra circulation when we do focus on a town. So we're actually doing Elmhurst in our upcoming September issue, and so we've taken kind of an approach to really spotlight, things that we think a person visiting town, but hopefully the residents would find most of interest in the community as well. So there's towns like Elmhurst and Hinsdale and Naperville and Wheaton and Glen Ellen and Downers and Geneva that have just more natural downtown attractions and things that we will probably focus on maybe a 3 to 4 year cycle. And then another group of towns that also have some attractions, but not as significant of a downtown, that might be in a 5 or 6 year cycle. So we try eventually to cover everybody, and I think we've pretty much featured every town, or pretty close at this point. So that's kind of how we go about it. It's not a very scientific way. It's more of, we look at it and say, well, how long has it been since we did Elmhurst? Well, it's been about 4 years, and Elmhurst has, changed a lot in the last 2 years especially, so we definitely need to get Elmhurst on, but on occasion we'll change things. We were going to feature Lockport last year, and they were undergoing a downtown streetscaping renovation, so we thought, this is not the best time, so we postponed it for a year. So we try to be flexible in the best interest of our readers, because we don't want to send them to a place that's all, engaged in, construction, but also to work with the towns to put their best face forward.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, Chuck, but we're with Chuck Cozette, editor and publisher of West Suburban Living magazine, and he's been sharing with us some of the magic that goes into making of that, and we'll be right back. The Community Bank of Elmhurst Business Zone has modern co-working space and a conference room free for our business customers. Visit the zone today at communityelmhurst.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender. Welcome back to Elmhurst, our community. I'm Ken Bartels. I have the privilege of talking to Chuck Cozette, who is the publisher and editor of West Suburban Living magazine. And Chuck, one of the things you do a great job, the magazine does a great job of sharing not only the what to do in the communities, but the articles, particularly on the spotlight communities, really talk to the culture and the history of the West Suburban communities. Why is that important, do you feel?
Well, I think many of the communities still draw quite a bit of their identity from their history. Certainly, it's changed dramatically. So if you go too far back, obviously, virtually all of these communities have an agricultural base. So I'm not sure that identity is there much anymore. But they all kind of sprung up along the train lines for the most part, and then kind of expanded out from there. And the downtowns, some of them have extremely historic downtowns. You go all the way out to the Fox Valley, and that used to be an escape for Chicagoans. It was like the Lake Geneva of its day, to go out to Geneva, Illinois. Glen Ellen, for example, had hot springs if you go all the way back. So I think that history is a kind of intertwined, and a lot of the attractions have some historic base to it. There's certainly some great museums. A lot of the towns have wonderful history museums, and so I think that's a big part of it, is that people still feel rooted in that history of where their community came from.
So the history of Elmhurst itself is indicative of what you just described with the communities, in that even the rebuilding of Chicago after the fire of 1871, much of that took place in Elmhurst, the West Suburban communities, which is where the people in the city of Chicago escaped to in the summertime, interestingly enough. We kind of think of the lakefront now as our respite, and in fact, they wanted to escape back in those days.
Sure. Well, there's a number of interesting tidbits like that you kind of dig up when, when you do the research on various towns. Downers Grove has a number of Sears homes. It goes back to the World War II days after World War II, there was a need for immediate housing for a lot of the soldiers coming home, not necessarily high-priced housing. And Sears actually had, homes that they could deliver. They
Yes.
delivered them on the trains, and they took them off the trains and built them. And you would think that, these are pretty simple things, but they're very nice homes and have lasted. And so they have a number of them in Downers Grove, and they're spread around other communities. But I know they have a little concentration. So I could probably go to each town. We're just doing Lockport, and Lockport is, has a quarry down there, down that way, and it's right on the I&M Canal, and has the big locks that some of the big ships used to come through from all over the country. So it's very interesting when you get down to a lot of the details.
So what's the most challenging element of being the editor and publisher of West Suburban Living magazine? Is it finding the advertisers? Is it finding a way to stay relevant in a very high-tech age? Is it something I'm not mentioning?
Well, I think any business, certainly the first thing you have to do is survive, and you have to be a viable business from a profitability standpoint. So in today's day and age, it's a little more challenging for magazines. However, we're in a pretty good niche relative to even newspapers, I think. Our primary target audience, we didn't set out to be this, but about 70% of our subscribers are women. We know that because we actually process the subscriptions, which not every magazine does on their own, but we do that personally. So we get a very good sense of who our target audience is. And women are a little more tactile. They're also, one of the reasons that there are so many of our subscribers is they're the social planners for the family, typically. So they love our dining guides and restaurant reviews, and because they want to know where to go out to eat. Our out and about calendar event sections tells them where to take the kids. And they like print, and they're more used to using it, whereas men, we know, like it when they get it in the house, but they're not necessarily the subscriber. So it might be sitting on the table, because when we do our Best of the West reader survey, we get a lot more percentage-wise votes from men than you would think, based on how many of our readers, our subscribers, are women. So we know it gets read by both, but our primary target audience is women. So right now, though, the good thing is that women are also the target audience many of our advertisers want to reach, from shops and boutiques to healthcare providers. Women make a lot of the healthcare decisions for the families. Remodeling, women tend to make a lot of the decisions on remodeling. So a lot of our advertisers do like our target audience. Obviously, western suburbs are fairly upscale, so they have disposable income, and that's obviously something that's important to our advertisers. So yes, I would say that's probably the primary concern right now is maintaining our advertising base. Certainly it's a little harder these days to also keep our subscriber base up because everyone's used to getting things free and on the internet. But in both cases, our niche is a little bit stronger than most, and so that's one of the things that we just continue to remember, what's important to our advertisers and what's important to our readers. And if we can serve those interests, a lot of the other things fall in place. Certainly there's a lot of things that need to be done behind the scenes, and fires that need to be fought that aren't always relevant to those key things. But I would say keeping our readers first and foremost in mind when we put our editorial plan together and as we edit the articles, and then just keeping our advertisers in mind and how we're going to best reach the target audience that they want to reach, prospective customers.
It's probably always an interesting time to be in the communications business, but it strikes me that right now there's this interesting circumstance where obviously there's still a lot of boomers around, and they've always liked print, and they've always liked the hands-on feel of literature and books. Then you switch over to the millennials and now the Gen Zs and what have you, and it's almost the cornucopia of communication vehicles has never been greater, and yet we seem to still be at the point where it isn't like anything's fallen off the table. Everything still needs to be maintained. Is it going to stay that way, you think, as things move forward?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First of all, we have adjusted and adapted. In addition to our print version, we have an online version of the magazine. So we have a website that's very extensive. It's also searchable. It's pretty sophisticated for a relatively small publication like ours. So because we know calendar of events and dining are important, you can go onto our website and plug in a date, and all the things that are going on that date will show up, okay? Same for dining. You can say, okay, I want Italian cuisine. Well, here's all the Italian restaurants in this region. I think we divided into, not every suburb, but like 5 regions. And so we're reaching a different audience, or an expanded audience through our website. We have a weekly e-newsletter that we call Best of the Burbs that we put out every Thursday that basically summarizes some of the great things that are going on that weekend. So we have adjusted and are reaching that digital audience. We do social media, not as extensively as perhaps we should, to also point our readers and people who follow the magazine in the direction of things that they would find of interest. But one of the things as a journalist, my roots are in journalism and newspapers, is a lot of the stuff that is out there in the digital world isn't very accurate, isn't very useful when it really comes down to it. So my hope has always been that after this big expansion, there would be a return to quality, a return to integrity, so that accuracy, that you could trust what you read. I don't think you can trust, I teach journalism for a number of years, and I used to say to my students, consider the source. So we want to be one of those trustworthy sources, and we think we are. We've built up that reputation and tradition. So our hope is that there's going to be a gradual return to, who can we trust on this? If we really want to know where the good restaurants are. The other thing we do is we consolidate information. So they could find all the information that we offer from our dining guide, but it would be all over the place to find it. We put it all in one place, easily accessible. So you don't get all the Chicago restaurants mixed in, because I don't want to drive that far. So I want to know just about the West Suburban restaurants. So I think that's one of the great qualities that we bring to the table, is that the real sense of trust, integrity, and then also consolidation of critical information, all within pretty much a half-an-hour drive of almost all of our readers and recipients.
So you've mentioned the Best of the West issue a couple of different times, and I'm curious, how many votes do you really get in that thing? Every year the categories seem to expand, which is just fine, life expands. But that's got to be a mammoth undertaking just all by itself.
It is. For a small magazine, we do some pretty amazing things, I think. I don't know if I call it magic, like you said in the beginning. I was like, I appreciate the concept, but I'm not sure we're magical. But we work hard behind the scenes. Our dining guide, for example, we're in the process of updating all the information. There's 600 restaurants we're going to be calling to make sure that we find the ones that have closed and find the ones that have added a outdoor patio or whatever, and just make sure that our information is up to date as possible. Regarding Best of the West, votes vary from year to year. We've added digital voting, so that's obviously expanded. It's usually several hundred votes, anywhere from a couple hundred to 500, and now with digital, it's probably over 1,000, but I don't remember the specific. One of the things that we pride ourselves on our Best of the West is we really try to make it a pure reader vote. So when you open up to digital voting, one of the problems you have, and we had this even before digital voting, is stuffing the ballot box. And we would have people So we've kind of come with some tricks of our own, having done it for 20 years, to how to figure that out, because we think our readers want a pure vote. And we don't, unfortunately, I mean, sometimes we wish we could, but we don't even give any bias to our advertisers. So if you're a restaurant that advertises with us, your primary benefit is that our readers have seen your ad maybe, and they might more likely vote for you. But it's completely based on what we get from our readers. And sometimes, it's a little hard to explain to an advertiser who doesn't get the first ranking that they would like. But I think in the end, unlike some other publications, it's an honest vote. And I think, again, it comes back to that integrity and respect that we've tried to generate over the years, that the people can trust us. So when our Best of the West comes out now, the nice thing is, obviously, the recipients winning categories couldn't be more excited, because they know it does result in positive business for them because of the fact that people trust and act upon seeing that, and they say, I'm going to try that restaurant, I'm going to go visit that shop. And so we take pretty great pride in the fact that we've developed this over the years, and that kind of sense of trust.
So I think I certainly wouldn't ask you to name a favorite community, but I will ask you if you've got a story or two from any of the magazines that just has always stuck with you. Just a location, a story, a person that's just simply stuck with Mr. Editor and Publisher.
I don't think I could single out any one story. I mean, if I really thought about it, had a little more lead-up time, I might have been able to go back, because certain things do impact you, but you move on to the next article, and you move on to the next issue, and it does kind of all run together, to be honest, after 23 years. One of the things I think has been most interesting is we do a Q&A in every issue. And we basically try to choose notable people from the western suburbs who have gone on and typically done something more national. We occasionally do something more regional, that they're well known, maybe a longtime business person who's known not just in their own community but throughout the area. But the interesting thing has just been how many significant people have grown up in the western suburbs, sure. Actors and performers, and so that has been kind of a discovery process that's been fascinating to me. And some of those stories have, been more interesting, that the people, even though they've achieved some level of fame, still take the time to respond to a publication like ours. Belushi, not John's brother, I'm sorry, Jim Belushi. A good example. He's still active at College DuPage, has done some fundraising and works with their theater department periodically. And he did a Q&A with us, and very busy actor and so on, but you could tell it was not a publicist who did this. He had it written, and there's been literally dozens and dozens over the years. I think we've probably done over 100 Q&As, and the time and interest and the fond memories, we always ask them, of course, what they're doing and how they got to where they are. Melissa McCarthy, another person. When we did her, she had just come off of, I think was still involved with Gilmore Girls, her first, and now she's this mega movie star. And, that's just been kind of amazing to watch that and to see that that's kind of based in our own communities. So some of the people who have come and done some pretty significant things. So that's probably overall something that sticks with me as amazing and something I would not have expected when I got into this, when we did the Q&A, that we thought we would run out of people pretty quickly, and that has been far from the case. As far as individual articles, I said, we've done some pretty interesting and touching things over the years as far as, who we've been able to, talk to and issues we've been able to cover, but probably the Q&A is ones that come to mind right now.
Sure. Well, as we come to the close of our time together, I want to ask just one last question. As now you're projecting out, you're looking to the future, what do you want to do with West Suburban Living Magazine? What's the next innovation? What's the next movement? How do you see your future?
That's a good question. After doing it all these years, it's something I'm actually thinking about right now is what iteration and how I'm going to turn over responsibilities gradually to other people. And so I don't have an easy answer for you. Certainly, as far as the publication itself, we're going to continue to expand our digital offerings. We're partnering with various organizations on subscriptions, offering gift subscriptions to try to get into audiences that may not know about West Suburban living. So we're trying to be strategic and creative, but I think fundamentally we still do believe the niche is there. As I said, other city and regional magazines, some of them are thriving, and so we do try to take tips from them. We think that there's still a great future in what we're doing, not specifically in print. Is there a time that maybe the magazine would go completely digital? Sure. I don't, anticipate that anytime soon, but certainly, printing and postage are probably our two biggest expenses outside of personnel. And so, if we could eliminate those and offer the same or a better product, that's certainly something we would consider. But we kind of are still watching, what other publications do that are maybe a little bigger than us, and let them figure this out and spend all the money to go through the trials and tribulations, and then maybe ride on their coattails. And we've done that already a little bit with the digital thing. We're learning and we're watching and we're listening, and that includes to our readers. We survey our readers periodically and ask them what they want. So hopefully, between all that, we'll get a pretty good sense of, not what we want, but what the marketplace and our readers dictate makes sense for the future of the magazine and of West Suburban living, whether that's in print, digital, both, or whatever.
Well, West Suburban living is certainly a part of the fabric of Elmhurst, and of course you started here, and it was a wonderful period of time for growth, and I very much appreciate you joining me on Elmhurst, our community. So thank you much.
Well, Ken, thank you. I very much appreciate the opportunity, and as you say, Elmhurst was a big part of our start too. Just being in a nice downtown area those first few years, we kind of fed off the energy and the sense of this is what we're covering. So when you're in amidst a community like Elmhurst that is very representative of overall western suburbs, it's hard to lose track of who your target audience is and what your coverage area is. So we're very grateful for this opportunity and also just for the opportunity to be the publication for the western suburbs.
We've been talking to Chuck Cozette, editor and publisher of West Suburban Living magazine, here on the EOC. I'm Ken Bartels, and from the Community Bank of Elmhurst, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again. The Community Bank of Elmhurst Business Zone has modern co-working space and a conference room free for our business customers. Visit the zone today at communityelmhurst.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.